say, well, very warm welcome to our event, which is entitled How to Fall in Love with Your Local High Street. And I'm really delighted to welcome our wonderful panel members. So my name is Dr. Sarah Montano. I'm one of the senior lecturers in marketing at the University of Birmingham, but also I'm one of the retail experts, and I do a lot of public engagement around retail and what's happening. So I'll just show these couple of slides and then I'm going to turn to my panel to introduce themselves. So I have three fantastic panelists, Alexandra, Jeanette and Rebecca, but I will let them introduce themselves. And I have a fantastic facilitator, Dr. Fashosh, who is also from the University of Birmingham, who is going to help steer the questions and answers for everybody. So those were just the slides that I wanted to share with you. As I say, this is an ESRC Festival of Social Science event, and we're really thankful for the ESRC for supporting this, because I think hopefully the panelists will share my view that any opportunity to come and talk retail to an audience is always incredibly a good opportunity for us. So I'm just going to hand over to my panelists to introduce themselves. So I'm going to hand over to Alexandra.
Hello, good evening. I'm Alexandra. I'm host and producer of Independent Thinking podcast, which explores a new era for the high street, all the challenges that it's currently going through, and speaks to independent retailers about their own experiences.
Thanks, Alexandra. I'll go to Rebecca.
Hello, I'm Rebecca. I am a content storyteller that covers everything from the initial comm strategy to engagement approaches, creating content for different retail organisations, services, etc. Big focus on experiential marketing and how you can bring the digital and the in-person brick and mortar experiences together, and a big focus on consumer experience.
Thanks very much, Rebecca. Jeanette.
Hello, I'm Jeanette. I'm one of the co-founders of the Clean Kilo and Kilo Zero. We're two local businesses basically based in Birmingham, and we opened the Clean Kilo in 2018, which is a zero waste shop, which I'll talk more in detail later, and also Kilo Zero, which is a zero waste cafe bar.
Thanks ever so much. And last but not least, Fashosh.
Hi everyone, welcome to the event. I am Fatosh and I am one of the lecturers in marketing at the University of Birmingham, and my research interests are in retailing and consumer research.
Thanks ever so much. So the format of our event is the panelists and myself, we're just going to talk very briefly each. We've gone for 5 minutes each, but I don't have a timer. I'm not going to stop anybody. So we're going to just talk a little bit about, for 5 minutes, about our thoughts around the high street. But really, our objective for this session is to really engage with the audience, with yourselves who've given up your time to come and attend this event and listen to us. So the format will be, as I say, we will speak for kind of 5 minutes and then we'll take questions from the audience, which Fashos is going to steer us through the questions. So if you would like to put your questions in the Q&A, then we will attend to the various questions in turn. Our event is timetabled to 7:30, but what we'll do is about 7 o'clock we'll start taking the last questions, so that we can make sure that we're able to fully answer the questions, and then we will end with a summary and some of our thoughts and reflections on the event. So I just explain just for a couple of minutes around sort of how we kind of put the event together, and then I'll turn to my panelists who will sort of share their thoughts around the high street. And we put this event together because the word "save the high street," it's often kind of talked about a lot in the media, There's various governmental objectives, and there's some kind of plans and proposals that governments often have, because they talk about kind of saving the high street. But I think we've probably noticed some of the challenges that the high street is facing. So therefore, we draw the conclusion that perhaps there's actually been a lot of talk, but perhaps very little kind of action. And which is why we really wanted to bring this event together as a call for action and to effect change. Because one of the things that I think we always are is that we should be hopeful, that actually, you know, particularly in the pandemic, we did fall back in love with our high streets. So, you know, there is hope, and we can do this. So that's a little bit about the context of the event. So I'm going to turn to my panelists in turn to share their thoughts around the high street. So I'm going to go around my screen. So I'll go, Alexandra, to you first.
Thank you. So when I was asked to think about what local means to me, I think I wrote down some words that instantly sprang to mind, because I shop locally, but also I've grown up in retail. I have worked in many family businesses. I grew up in a doll's house shop from a very young age. So I've been completely immersed in it. And for me, I came up with like a list of kind of things that kind of came off the top of my head. Firstly, I shop locally because I enjoy it. I love the sense of place. I love that kind of locality that it gives me. I also want to support a local business who I believe in and who I think does good things. Often friendliness and the level of care and service can be arguably higher than sometimes what you can expect in chains. There's a sense of care, and that, like I say, in the product as well, and in the area and the choices that customers are encouraged to make. There's a sense of distinctiveness as well, both in the product offer, but also how independent shops and kind of local shops give us characteristics and the quirks and how an area feels, and how it kind of its personality, and what marks it out from the rest of the other towns and cities in the country. But for me, more than anything above that, it's about a sense of feeling part of something. And it's a sense of community or belonging, and it's bandied around a lot. But it's, for me, it's what it completely boils down to. It's what the absolute heart of what makes us human. It's what makes shops feel special. It's why we connect to some shops over others, and what we need to nurture if our local high streets are to thrive. But for me, the biggest frustration of this word is, for too long, it's been interpreted as something really cozy. Community, isn't it nice? Isn't it something that doesn't really matter? It delivers no economic value. And the word community is often co-opted by larger brands who are often anything but invested in theirs. So understandably, there's like a cheapening of the term that's happened, and a cynicism that surrounds the use of the word. And it also has become something associated with the past. It's seen as something we've moved on from, we're too big enough for, you know, we no longer need that. But a sense of collective belonging, of looking out for each other, of being part of something bigger is what was alive and thriving during the earliest stages of the pandemic, just as Sarah said. You know, it's about shop owners kind of speaking to each other, sharing ideas on how to pivot and adapt to changing times, support each other when things got increasingly tough. Or shop owners and their customers. You know, we began to take a real interest in their lives. They also began to understand about difficulties, the links became much stronger, and began to understand or be reminded of how connected we all are. I remember having a chat with a local shop owner and just being like, how are you really? Like, how are you really doing? And that conversation just was something we hadn't had before. So the fact is, these aren't just nice to haves. Shopping locally, being part of a community is hugely important. It's about people having the amenities they need around them, that they can walk or wheel or cycle to easily and cheaply. It's about business owners who are invested emotionally and financially in an area, whose interest it is in, like, to keep the area feeling vibrant, welcoming and successful. It's about peripheral relationships, and I know you can all think of them now, kind of people, baristas you might know, or like shop owners you chat to, who we have, like all these chats we have with each other. The shop owner who might notice when a regular customer isn't coming in as much, or can notice changes in someone's behaviour, which is particularly important as we kind of think about our older community as well. It's about active frontage on a high street. It's about having kind of an impact on what that does to mental health outcomes and feelings of safety in a community, of civic pride. It's about companies who know what's going on locally and adapt their business accordingly. And I was chatting to actually a local bar recently who had a school show going down the road, so they just needed less people to man the floor because they knew that nobody was coming in that night. Everyone was out. it's about us all playing a part in making an area the best it can be. So the impact of these things are not just nice. We see these impact on health outcomes, on feelings of isolation, of loneliness. If we foster a sense of belonging, of trust, it's incredibly important. And these micro interactions we have, the bumping into people we have, I was seeing a florist earlier on who was like decorating the door of a beautiful local restaurant, and just the smiling and just be like, hey, how are you doing? Oh, isn't that gorgeous? This all matters, and it enriches our lives. It makes us feel part of something and brings a bit of soul to a high street. And it benefits us all. And we lose all of that if it moves out of town. And there's obviously a convenience argument, but for too long that's gone unchallenged and it's won out, and it hasn't been questioned enough. It's convenient for who and at what cost. But if we address all of these things, it's not going to be easy to change anything or to change the status quo. It never is. So to close, it's never going to be fixed if we only think about what we can do as individuals. It's about putting our money where our mouth is, of course, but it's about calling for change from our elected officials. We need change to make change of use easier in buildings, to reform business rate system. We need to look at what we're willing to accept. And we need to think about what the kind of high streets we want to see in 20, 30 years' time, just as Sarah wrote. I'm sure you all kind of read the blog post as well. We don't want to replicate a bygone era. We'll never move forward if we're looking back. It's about refreshing, overhauling, rejuvenating what our high streets are to us and to our local areas, and reflect our needs as they are now. So we need new ideas, fresh approaches, and new blood. And it's a tremendously exciting time, a challenging time. But if we want it to be, it's hugely exciting. And it's not going to be easy, but it will be worth it.
Thank you very much. I would say that was absolute perfection in terms of timing there. So you were exactly 5 minutes. So I'll go to Rebecca next.
Hello. So I'm going to talk kind of from a consumer perspective about what local means to me and to people all across our country, all across the world. So I'll start with a little bit of context as to where I'm approaching from, because it's a little bit different to potentially some other people. I'm lucky enough to live in a really small town called Stamford in Lincolnshire. And we really do have a high street that's tackling the status quo. We have a CIC, Community Interest Company, in our town called Shop Stamford that got started. A group of local people came together and said, you know what? Our local high street is so important to us. And it really reflects what Alexandra was saying about community and about pulling together. They do events. The local independent school has started a scheme called the Stamford Card that you can purchase. It both supports children to get scholarships to go to that school, but gives you discounts and perks when you shop with local. So it's really encouraging people to stay in the town, shop in the town. And I thought of a few things that I think are really important to making that happen and how it really works in our local town, because honestly, you have Shop Stamford evenings and you have events where hundreds of people will come together just to come and be in the photograph to say, I wanted to be a part of this. And that's so important. So the first thing that we've really started to gain in our high street that I didn't see when I lived in a city quite to the same extent, even though you'd expect that you would, is convenience. Now, we're a small cobbled street town. We're not the most accessible, but particularly as we've discussed through the pandemic, that accessibility hugely increased because our shops really went to where their consumers were. And that was the crux of it. They said, you know what, people can't come to our market stall today, but we're going to go to them. We're going to deliver. And people did this across the country, but we're beneficial enough that we have that all the time. We have continued that and had that pre-pandemic to an extent. So being convenient and easily accessible is a huge priority. A lot of our goods that you can purchase are locally sourced. We're so lucky to have amazing artisan businesses across the local area who are encouraged to set up a store, to have a pop-up shop. And actually, a lot of the spaces, as Alexandra was saying, have been made to facilitate this. A large unit has been turned into smaller pop-up spaces so that you can try out having a store, you can start to promote yourself, raise awareness of your business, and that's so empowering to see. Everything that people are trying to do, and something that can always be improved, is creating conveniences that fit into people's daily routines. There's nothing worse than thinking, I really want to shop local, but actually the store's not on my way to work and I'm just going to go to Tesco. And that is the way that people will think. We all have really busy lives. We all have habits that are already formed. If you go to the coffee shop in the train station because it's in the train station, unless that becomes an independent or a local store to you, then you're not going to change from a big corporation. And we're very lucky that some of these big corporations have started to help with the Shop Stamford scheme and have been adopted into it. So even though you might have big names on the high street, they'll sponsor something at the Shop Stamford events, or, you know, they're actually a franchise. So they're really willing to get on board with perks and discounts and loyalty benefits for people to shop locally. And I think I was thinking about the social aspect. I mean, it's such a small town, which has its perks and its negatives. You know, everyone knows everyone. But that's what's beautiful about it. Everyone does know everyone. You build relationships, and you really do feel like there's people you see just down the high street on your walk to work, and you feel like you could stop and have a conversation any day. But I think the thing that came down to for me when I thought, what is local to my high street, was novelty. None of the businesses in our high street are complacent. Nobody sits and goes, you know what, this is what I do and this is how I'm going to do it. Because everyone's felt that pinch and that push, that business rates have been changing, that consumers have been shopping for convenience, that they couldn't come out and buy, you know, the exciting entertainment goods that they would have usually gone to buy, because everyone's got that pinch on their money. And so novelty, not getting bored of the same things, has been so important. We're so lucky to have independent pop-up shops and things like that keeps that going. We have a local market and a farmers market, which again keeps that novelty. So just to summarize, I feel like, you know, shopping local for us as consumers in where I live is all about the fact that the companies are trying to meet our needs. They are trying noticeably to understand us, and they want to make our lives easier. And that's when you go, okay, these stores are doing it for the right reason. They're not out for just money. They respect me as a customer. And that's what keeps people coming back. And I think the more community we've built around the fact that we want the high street to exist, I think you'd struggle to find anyone in our town who doesn't know what the phrase Shop Stamford is. And so it's all about community, convenience, and meeting the customers so that they don't have to make too many adaptations while still showing your novel, exciting products. And that's what local would mean to me.
Thanks, Rebecca. And I think it's really nice to hear a success story as well, and hear about a high street that's kind of tried a few different things, and it's a great success. So I'll turn to Jeanette next.
Hello. Yeah, so I'm just gonna talk more about, I guess, like mine and my husband's business. Basically, we're small business owners, and we set up the Clean Kilo in 2018 in Birmingham. So the Clean Kilo is a zero waste shop, and for those of you who haven't heard of that term before, a zero waste shop is one that tries to reduce plastic pollution. So when we started talking about the concept in 2017, after watching A Plastic Ocean, strangely back then, you'd be surprised, like not a lot of people knew about the plastic pollution. So the idea that we wanted a shop in the local community where people would have to bring their own containers and fill up with bulk items was actually really bizarre. And our friends and family were quite worried about this strange concept. But yeah, we pursued it because we wanted to do the right thing. We didn't want to have to go to lots of places ourselves to get things plastic free. So the idea of the Clean Kilo was to try and get as many as products under one roof, and also source as local as possible. So when we started, obviously, we spent about a year researching the project and putting together a crowdfunding campaign. So we managed to launch a crowdfunding campaign in 2017. So at the end of 2017, it just so happened that Blue Planet 2 aired in November of that year. So that was a pure coincidence, and that was basically when majority of people found out about the extent of the plastic pollution. So we just happened to be around a good time. So the actual target of £15,000, we managed to raise over £20,000 to set up the Clean Kilo zero waste shop, and 500 people from the local community donated or volunteered to help as well. So it was very much a community project. People felt invested in it. People obviously wanted a local zero waste shop in the area, and it just had great traction at that point, because plastic pollution was in the news. So we managed to open up the Clean Kilo in Digbeth, which is city centre of Birmingham, but it's more like slightly outside of the main area. So like you'd think of maybe Brick Lane in London or Northern Quarter in Manchester. It's an area more full of like independents as well. So that was a great area for us, and we felt like it was a great location because it was still accessible from like people coming from outside of Birmingham that wanted to travel in by train and public transport. But yeah, when we opened, it was a great success. We had like 50 people queuing at the door, and the first kind of like 2 years of trades at the Clean Kilo Digbeth was crazy. People wanted to shop in a local store. They liked that they could get like bulk items. They liked that we worked for local independents, and like how we actually talked to the suppliers to reduce the plastic was really important, because we asked them like, can you do things differently? And for instance, like our crisps, our local crisp supplier, basically they grow their own potatoes. They have their own rapeseed plant, so they're using that rapeseed oil to make their crisps, and they normally package into normal packets that's often unrecyclable because of the mixed layer. So we asked them, can you actually put them into buckets for us, and we'll bring the buckets back to you. So we're creating a circular to reduce that plastic pollution. And from that conversation, after they started doing that with us back in 2018, they now supply over 500 zero shops across the country, because they've collaborated with a cleaning product supply that is also circular. So whilst they're delivering the circular cleaning products in 20-litre drums and refilling those, they're also exchanging the buckets of the rapeseed oil and the crisps. So yeah, having those conversations with local suppliers, and we have like a lot of products that we do create a circular. So yeah, so that was really good, because obviously we're keeping money in the local economy. There's real people that literally drop off their own products, that they've made soaps locally in the area. They've made all sorts of breads and baked goods and items. So that sense of community is really nice, and I think it makes the products more unique, and it provides a platform for local small businesses to actually have their items, whereas sometimes, it's quite hard online because it's so saturated. The market to actually have a physical store where you can have your items is actually like would really a lot of people would want that exposure. So the Clean Kilo was very successful in 2018, 2019, and we actually applied for a FedEx Small Business grant competition. So the competition was £20,000 would be the winning prize, and it would be like, what would you do with the £20,000 if you won it? So we wrote that we wanted to set up a second store, and obviously a second store would amplify the amount of plastic saved because it's more accessible to more people, and would want it in a more residential neighbourhood. And we managed to actually win that competition, and there was 15,000 applicants. So we managed to get that funding in 2019, and that's when we chose Bourneville, which is a suburban area of Birmingham, to set up the Clean Kilo number 2. And again, like what's interesting about the Bourneville area is that I guess is quite small in itself. I think not many people from Bourneville maybe would come into city centre, because it's like just that little bit further away. So having like a local store and that's plastic free was like really useful for a lot of people, and not just because it was plastic free, but just because it was a local grocery store. So we put our fruit and veg outside, and the people that don't know what a zero waste shop is will just be attracted by all this nice fruit and veg. So they'd come into the Clean Kilo and then realise, oh, they don't have like packets here, and I'll have to bring my own containers. This is how it works here. So suddenly we're actually changing behavioural habits, because people are getting on board with the fact that, oh yeah, like I bring my containers, or this is my routine now, I'll just pack a little bag of containers, I bring it to the Clean Kilo. So that was really powerful, how the accessibility of that store in a residential neighbourhood actually changed people's behaviours. And again, 2019 was a great year for Bourneville. Kind of fast forward to obviously the pandemic. The pandemic for us as a grocery store was pretty crazy. So we found obviously mid-March was when the panic buying was happening, and we had to change quick. And I think because we recognised that there was no restrictions at that point, but it just felt like uneasy because so many people were cramming in to buy like pasta, dry goods, flour, and obviously there was this new virus going around. So we had to quickly make decisions as small business owners to implement like all the restrictions. So we implemented like the number of restrictions before even the supermarkets did. So then suddenly that changes obviously the capacity of what the store can do, but we needed to do that to keep it safe. And obviously all the extra restrictions we started then implementing over time, to the point where it got so bad obviously that we decided it was best to actually do click and collect. So suddenly, like overnight pretty much, we've created this online shop where people can buy click and collect. So that's how quickly we had to adapt. And so I'm talking a matter of days, we managed to upload products onto our website that, to be honest, was just a landing page for information at the time. So yeah, that was like a quick adaptation. And then quite quickly as well, Digbeth kind of took a dive. Basically, Digbeth, with it being city centre, there's not that much residential around it. So kind of after the panic buying happened, suddenly no one was in the area because obviously you were to stay at home and not go on public transport, and obviously stay on your local high street, which ironically there isn't much of a high street in that sense in Digbeth because there's not people like living close by. So yeah, we were really quiet. So we actually closed Digbeth for a number of months, and then we remained at Click and Collect in Bourneville for a good probably 3 months from what I can remember. It was Click and Collect only, if not longer. And then we actually never really opened up the Clean Kilo Digbeth to full capacity. So when we eventually did open up, like a couple of months afterwards, we opened to 3 short days a week rather than 6 long days. And that's because Digbeth, the area, had completely changed by that point. People were still working from home and generally still scared to come out. Bourneville was stable because we had that local community, because it was in a more of a local area. And yeah, that continued for a while, and it was kind of August 2021 I did announce publicly on social media that the Clean Kilo Digbeth was struggling. And the Clean Kilo has a lot of support in Birmingham. It's quite known, and it's known nationally as well. Like we have won even national awards and been on national press. So, so it was quite a big announcement that the Clean Kilo Digbeth would have to close, because that actually is quite detrimental to reducing the plastic as well, like the whole movement of zero waste. And then, yeah, that kind of resurged some support, but obviously not enough people. We can't make people come back to Digbeth when there's obviously the pandemic has changed so much. So like given it a few months thought, like we didn't really want to leave Digbeth. That was our flagship store, so we're looking at options of what we could do. And one thing we did find was the COVID recovery grant. So the COVID recovery grant was a grant that was open to I think maybe different councils had different like ways of proportioning the grant, but in Birmingham it was kind of open to most businesses that they could apply for. So we decided to diversify the Clean Kilo Digbeth site to Kilo Zero, which is a zero waste cafe bar, and actually move the Clean Kilo Digbeth to Moseley, which again is a suburban area of Birmingham where there's lots more residential. The setup is much more like Bourneville, so we felt like it would do better there on someone's local high street. And what Kilo Zero is basically a hospitality version of the Clean Kilo, which again, we're sourcing local as possible because there's plenty of local craft beer and ciders. There's local distilleries of gin, vodkas, and we're sourcing brands such as carbon negative rum, carbon negative gin. We've got locally roasted coffee. Our baked goods still come from all the same local bakers. And we believe that hospitality in Digbeth would be much stronger than being a zero waste grocery store. So that's how we spent the grant. And I think the grant was actually really a good initiative in terms of sparking the economy, because obviously instead of us closing, which would have been the reality, we took a chance and thought, okay, we're going to spend this money. So then the money that we got, we had to obviously put in, I think it was 25% in ourselves as well. But the money that obviously from that, we're now paying a local carpenter, and then we're paying a local plumber, paying a local electrician, and then obviously we're hiring a team for the bar. So there's like suddenly this money is circulating in the economy again. It's actually really good, because otherwise we would have just closed. So we actually, this is all very recent. So we actually managed to move, we closed Clean Killer Digbeth in January, start of this year, January the 15th, and we managed to move and open Moseley by February, so only like a month later. And in that time, we actually researched basically how to open a zero waste cafe bar ourselves. We had no hospitality industry experience. So only in April this year did we open a Kilo Zero, which is in Digbeth now. But probably the other thing that's kind of going on in Birmingham at the minute, which I'm sure we'll talk about a bit more later, is there are roadworks, and quite like roadworks will sound like a small thing maybe, but when it's actually been going on since over about a year and a half, I want to say. So the roadworks are to put a new tram line in, which obviously is great for the future, and it would have been planned a long time ago. But I feel like what happened is that the pandemic happened, but then the plans for the tramworks didn't change. So I think the last restriction for COVID was last year in February, and then the roadworks started in July. So you're talking about a matter of months. So hospitality and retail has been hit for the last 2 years during a pandemic. And then you give 3 months of kind of recovery time before being hit with roadworks. And these roadworks are still ongoing now. And sadly, 3 businesses just in the last 14 days have announced they're closing in Digbeth. And they're very well-established, good businesses as well. And yeah, they're our friends, and obviously having them is good for us because we have shared customers, we even have shared suppliers. And now that's because one of them's closed, now we don't have our circular milk delivery of the 10-litre buckets, because it affects the supply chain, because people obviously from the countryside don't want to come into city centre just to deliver to one premises. So it affects all sorts of things. And yeah, there is a lot of kind of talk in the local news now about how these roadworks are really damaging local businesses, because they are good for the future, but it's like, who's still going to be here in 1 year's time when or plus, what they say 1 year, could be more than that, plus when the roadworks finish. And that's kind of the situation that I'm currently in at the moment.
Thanks, Jeanette. And I think that's a really powerful testimony to the challenges that small businesses on our high streets have, and the importance of them. And as you say, I think there's lots of things within that we'll want to kind of talk about as we move through the session. So I just say to the audience, we're really happy to receive open challenging questions. If there's any small businesses who've registered, we'd really like to hear from you. People who are in the position to effect change, so like local councillors, again, we'd really like to hear some of your questions as well. I'll just do sort of my few minutes, Fatos. If I go on longer than 5 minutes, you've got permission to jump in and shout very loudly at me. But just kind of I think just to kind of pull a few things together, almost like we'd kind of planned it. And as we'd kind of mentioned, we kind of put this together, I think, to kind of celebrate the love for the high street, because we say it's often kind of really negative, in the press, but actually it's really kind of part of kind of who we are. And the theme of the ESRC this year is our local area, and that's why I think this, as we emerge from the pandemic, it gives us a really nice kind of opportunity about where do we go from here, because there are things that we can do as we come out of the pandemic. And as Alexandra said, high streets, main streets, local urbanizations, it doesn't matter where we are in the world, locality is part of our everyday lives. And here in the UK, our Office for National Statistics data, it shows very strongly that people want to return to physical retail outlets, and they have massively reduced their online spending. So that desire is there. as you said, Alexandra, often it's, you know, people are going out to retail parks and things like that, but there is convenience in our local area. There are perhaps many things that could be done, but obviously it's making sure they happen. I noticed that Rishi Sunak said when he was campaigning to be PM in July, he said that he wanted to support his local areas. I'm not sure if Rishi is on the call, but hey, just in case you are, Rishi, we'd be really welcome some kind of support. You're welcome to get in contact with all of us. And I think, you know, Rebecca, as you were saying, like, you know, kind of local taxation, kind of, you know, local rates kind of supports for kind of startups, because empty shops, they're not welcoming. You know, they do make, you know, it does look sad when you kind of go past, and obviously an empty shop isn't going to draw a customer in because it doesn't kind of physically exist. So what can we do that we can think about perhaps using those in a different way, or getting entrepreneurs in? One of the things we often talk about sort of in our world is around the sort of third places, and the real importance of having places where we can go that aren't our home, that we've spent a heck of a lot of time sat in our cupboards at kind of home, but also as we've gone back to the workplace, we do want to get away from work as well. But also as a sort of byproduct of that, of course, with the increase of working from home, you know, people are seeking to have something local where you can go and have a break, you can kind of grab a coffee, have a you know, a bit of a break between our endless kind of Zoom calls. And I think hospitality is increasingly important. I think, again, this might be a question that we answer a little bit in our discussions, but I think we do need to think about how we attract young consumers. Newport's done some really interesting work on that, around trying to get young consumers and young entrepreneurs in into their local area, and bring in the big brands as well. You know, big brands have powerful draws. A lot of them say that they're community minded. They talk about their social responsibility. So, you know, well, there you go. So what's more socially responsible than coming into a local area, acting as a draw and acting as a bit of a honeypot for smaller businesses who don't necessarily have that kind of marketing kind of power. And I think many of us might fondly remember the kind of high streets of kind of yesteryear, where there were communities. You know, if you're looking over to kind of like films and things, isn't it? It's always kind of like the local kind of community. And I don't think we necessarily quite want to go back to that. But sometimes we do have a phrase is you've got to look backwards to move forwards. And I think there were good things in that. You know, people were kind of connected to each other. As you said, Rebecca, there is a bit of a downside to that as well, but actually kind of like knew each other. So what can we look at what we did? And how, you know, can we take that kind of forward? And some of you might have been on our attended the previous events that we've done. We normally do an event like this every year. We often do some spin out events from this as well. So, you know, watch this space. But we did an International Women's Day event in March. And one of the things we were talking about there is that, you know, as consumers have power. So consumers have the power to transfer their spending, you know, from the big change, you know, to local businesses. So kind of use the power. And just to sum up very finally, I would say if we went fast forward for 20 years time, do we want to look back and wish that we'd saved our high streets? It isn't too late. We can work together to make our high streets of the future. So I will finish there. So Fatos, I'm going to hand over to you. Have we got any questions from our audience?
Yes, Sarah, we have good questions. So I will start with Pam's question. And she asked about how we can attract, how we can bring people back to the high street. So what could be the main attraction points that high streets could offer people?
Thanks. That's a great question, Pam. So I think, Jeanette, if I'll start with you first. What do you think?
Yeah, I think obviously being accessible is key, which is obviously something that hasn't been there for Digbeth. I think, yeah, being able to actually like navigate yourself through, or having good public transport as well, it would obviously encourage people back to the high street. And obviously having multiple things to do in that area. So obviously it's really key that we keep the businesses that we have in that area, because obviously if they start closing down, that actually is going to detract from people. So so kind of backwardly, I would say then it's kind of back to like local councils and government to help really instill that, because obviously having a thriving high street requires having thriving businesses, so people then want to come to that high street. But obviously the reality is that in some places, whether it be Digbeth alone or obviously in other places that don't have roadworks, it's about cost of living being an issue for small business owners, and it's about that, you know, like there needs to be financial support really from government to actually save these businesses that are there right now. Obviously there is talks about how we can fill our empty shops, but even if someone was given a grant to have an empty shop filled, it's like, can they actually remain there long term? Because now then they've got their rents to pay, their staff shortages, and there are so many rising energy prices. So until we can have a really good, strong high street in terms of like from the kind of perspective of the people that actually run those businesses, then customers won't want to go to that area. So it really needs to work as an all-rounder.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think that's one of the things that isn't perhaps talked about enough in the media, is it? There's obviously a lot of focus on consumers and kind of households at the moment around the kind of cost of living. But actually, you know, what does that mean for kind of small businesses? And I noticed in the pandemic, that's where a lot of the media were. They were talking to kind of small businesses and about lockdowns, but that seems to have kind of like faded away. So it's kind of bringing that momentum back. I'll go to Rebecca next and then Alexandra.
Yeah, so I really think there's a couple of things that are really important here. I think it's kind of touching on what Jeanette said, practicality. You know, what does the local high street offer you that I couldn't just get when I popped to Tesco on the way home, or that I couldn't get at that big retail outlet that when we're driving by I could pick up there? It needs to be the things that I couldn't just order on Amazon, or something that adds to the experience of buying it in person. You know, make my in-store experience more beneficial than reading 100 reviews on Amazon. You know, convince me that, you know, this product is local, it's better quality, that you as a store owner have chosen to sell this product to me because you know it's the best quality. And I think that's something that you can kind of lose. You do have it in some other larger stores, of course you do, but something that you can really lose in terms of the big corporations, if we just shop at Tesco or another supermarket, is that you don't have that specialism. Whereas even those stores used to be like mini stores in themselves. They had a butchery, they had a dairy counter. Increasingly, and I know a lot of stores have been doing this, they've been decreasing those skill sets. You know, everyone is now a specialism at everything in the store because of staff shortages and increasing costs. And so what the local high street can offer you is that experience, is that skill set, as someone who is committed to their specific trade. And I think that links to my second point, which is diversity. You want to see brands in your local area that reflect your personality, that have a personality that you click with. I know one of the things we can often get as a really small market town in rural Lincolnshire is that people feel like, oh, well, that'll be a bit old, that's for old people, or, you know, that'll be a bit dated. But actually we've got some really up and coming novel brands. And now we've got some bigger brands moving in too. I mean, we've got some quirky kind of jewelry and gift shops. And now look who's moving in next month, Oliver Bonus. So people start to see, like big companies start to see the value. And then, like you say, they'll become those honeypots to draw more people in. But I think they're the two things that I believe would start to bring people into the high street, is just making sure that it's practical, that you can get what you need, that it's not all gift shops or it's not all one certain trade, and that there's a good mix of people having the opportunity. You know, don't make it only the affluent who can choose to set up a business in your area, and in encouraging people to be able to have those spaces to try something new. You know, people will be willing to, I'm almost certain, if the opportunity is given to them to try something new. We know there's hundreds of people out there with great ideas, but at the moment I think the stores are too large, too expensive, and there's just not that facilitation in all areas to allow that to happen.
Thanks, Rebecca. Alexandra?
Yeah, I think both excellent points there. And I think that I wanted to pick up on some word you said earlier, Rebecca, about novelty, which I really loved as well. And I think but the way you talked about novelty, it was not in a gimmicky way. It was like it's true, like it's offering something novel. And I think that it's about responding to the local area. And I think that that's something that a local high street can do really well. And they can really kind of plug into what the kind of local issues are, what they need, and I think that they can respond to that in a brilliant way. But I think there's something around like collaboration here, and this is not going to ever be solved just with retailers talking to retailers. It's also thinking about working with universities, with kind of tech startups, with colleges, with schools, and how we're getting that freshness and allow people to fail, allow people to make mistakes. And I think that it's very cut and dry the way we're seeing it. Like, we've got this finite amount of time to save the high street. If we don't save it, well, how about we play around? How about we try stuff out and see what works and see what responds? Because to be honest, we're all still feeling our way after the pandemic. Do you know what I mean? I think we're all still kind of, I'm still walking down my local area thinking, oh gosh, this a huge building that Topshop was there is no longer there, and this 3 department stores are closed on Princess Street. I'm in Edinburgh, so they're making a main huge shopping street. And I think it's about really giving ourselves a time to think, stop, reflect, and think, right, what do we need and how can we work together, to get there?
Yeah, I mean, absolutely. I think we probably all see that in our local areas, don't we? So here in Birmingham, there's a great big hole where John Lewis was and where Debenhams were. And I think you're right, where's the space to kind of try a few bit of stuff, see what happens? Does it work? Does it not work? Because we don't know what will kind of happen. But as you say, it's very kind of like, well, you've got to do this, or, and these are the kind of like routes, and you have to borrow money from here. And that's obviously, some people aren't necessarily going to want to do that because of the kind of level of kind of risk. Jeanette, I think just picking up something you said about accessibility as well, and about making sure that we can actually kind of get to kind of places, I think is important. And I was just thinking, like, when I had a small baby, like I walked like for miles with the pram. Like I was like a car. I probably clocked up 100,000 miles, kind of like walking. So hopefully they'd kind of go to sleep at kind of one point, but kind of having a place to kind of get to was kind of really important. And then of course you get kind of like little community events and kind of things like that, but that was actually kind of like really important. And I think we don't talk enough about the importance of places for mental well-being. And just kind of like a place where we can kind of like go, I could get out of the house for a little bit and I can kind of see some other people as well. As you say, it tends to be financially often viewed as kind of very cut and dried, but actually places are more. They're more than just about a transaction. Sometimes they're a place to be. Sometimes it's just, I'm not alone. I'm actually alone. I'm not necessarily meeting anyone, but I'm not alone as well. Fatos, how are we doing with our questions?
So next question is from Emma. You partially responded this question in terms of different types of consumers. Emma's question is focusing on young people. So she asked, how can we encourage young people who are digital natives with a love of big brands to fall in love with high street?
Thanks. Rebecca, do you want to take that one first as our consumer expert?
So I think there's a really strong perception, and it is true, that young consumers are really keen on big brands. I mean, we've seen it recently. If anyone's seen the fashion brand Shein have just been exposed for really poor working practices. And only this week they were shown to have an increase in sales. So people just saw, consumers are really, really uninterested in certain aspects and interested in others, and they can be quite fickle. The trends don't necessarily reflect how they feel. But I think, as, say, an independent business who really wants to encourage young consumers, you need to look in the places they are. Look on TikTok, on Instagram, where are they spending their time? And then go, okay, and they're engaging with big brands like Nike and like Apple. Why is it they're engaging with those? What are they doing? And then, even in a small way, start to replicate those things. Like our local town, we've got an independent coffee shop, and they've just started themselves a podcast and an Instagram channel. because they realized that that's what people in their local area wanted. And that's what they're talking about. They're talking about topics that bring in those local people. And what they've then done is they've gone, okay, so I understand the young consumer online. I know how to access them if that's where they are. If we're saying they're digital natives, the next thing they're doing is going, okay, but they're not always in their homes. So where do they go? And then start breaking down those spaces and saying, okay, so they're always in Starbucks. What is it that Starbucks offers that we don't? Is it because they've got literally practical things, great charging stations, you can stay a long time, you know, they've got quirky, interesting drinks? Is it the brand? Is it that, you know what, everyone knows a Costa coffee cup at Christmas, so I really want to have something like that and replicate that? There can be costs associated, but there are also ways you can minimize those costs. So instead of paying an art worker, find if there's a local artist that you can collaborate with and do a little bit of mutual beneficial, you know, we'll promote your artwork if we can pop it on our coffee cup, you know, and come to a negotiating deal. But thinking about things other than coffee, for example, I used to think that there's in actually the nearest city to me, kind of a quirky store, retail clothing store that do this really well, is they bring other experiences in to the store. Things that, you know what, if we're looking at Generation Z and we're saying they're on their phones and they want to be making TikToks, create a space in your store that they can come and make a TikTok. Have a photo wall that they want to come and take a selfie on and encourage that, you know. Have somewhere they can grab a coffee, put a photo booth for a low price or for free. Have, you know, live music events. That's what a couple of places in our town do, you know. They're not places you necessarily normally go for live music, but it's like the big corporations have done it. You know, you go to River Island, you used to go to Topshop, there was a DJ in the corner, and it's strange, but it was bringing those young people in because that's something they like to do. They like to listen to music. So bring that into the store. Other things they've looked at, have art exhibitions in your store. I know something Sarah was saying yesterday to me, you know, Selfridges did this really well. They had an interactive art exhibition. There's no reason you can't do that in a smaller store. Even if you have limited retail space, you know, talk to your local council, do a pop-up in the high street. Encourage people to come and young people to come, but make the experiences, and it's a little bit of market research needed, but make them things that they're already doing. If they've not got to change their habits and their behaviours, but they can do it down the road rather than going all the way to the big city, they probably will do. So that's kind of my 2 pence on it.
There's really nice ideas, and I was just I'll come to Alexandra and Jeanette in a moment. I was just thinking about like a teenager space as well, because often we tend to talk about young consumers, but it tends to be over 18, but kind of 14 to 18, you know, it's a bit of a kind of like iffy age, because you don't necessarily want them to be off into the centre of town by themselves, but also they need a little bit of freedom to kind of get used to it. And I often thought if you had a kind of like a space where teenagers could kind of like hang out, you know, again, like a bit like an old-fashioned kind of milkshake bar or something, but a bit of a kind of safe space. Again, try it. Let's see if it kind of works. So I go to Alexandra and then Jeanette, I'll come to you.
Yeah, totally agree. I was thinking about that, and I was thinking about stories my mum used to tell me about, like, oh, we sat for 5 hours just with one drink, and maybe that's why a lot of these things, you know, did die in some ways. But I completely agree. But for me, it's about making the whole high street feel welcoming, and I think it's so often there's an attachment of like loitering. I mean, I hate the word loitering because it's only used groups of people, and who decides who's loitering, who's not, and that feeling of like being moved on. And I'm thinking of a shopping centre in my head actually that actively discourages, you know, groups of young people to go to who are just sort of hanging out. And they're just, because as well, I think you forget very quickly as an adult that there's not really anywhere to go. Like, you know, I'm too old to go to I'm not going to go to a playground. And I'm not going to, like, you know, there's no youth clubs, and I can't go to a bar. So, you know, where can I go? There's like giving places that feel the welcoming. But also I'm going to flip the question a little bit on its head, because in lots of ways, I think we chase Gen Z, and I think that's good, and I think that absolutely, and we kind of need to court them. But we completely discount huge like demographics, and I'm thinking particularly, and having just come fresh from a conversation about older people and thinking about dementia in retail space, I mean, we don't at all cater for people's needs of, it's almost like we just discount you when you're kind of like retired, or you're like, you're not working yet. It's almost like you're only interesting to as a certain groups. And I think it's important that we actually think about offering spaces that actually feel, I think, like, brilliant word, Jeanette, you're saying about accessible. And I think what that means to different groups, and actually just turning it a bit on its head a bit. And thinking about our attitudes generally in retail, and about lots of different, how we approach different challenges. And yeah, so I think it's important to be hugely welcoming, and I love those ideas that you had, Rebecca. I think particularly about offering experiential stuff is really important, but also I think that there's for everyone as well.
Yeah, I think that's a really great point. Jeanette?
So I'll talk a bit about things that have worked for us so far, and it was a lot of the points that like Rebecca mentioned. So like for the Clean Kilo, for instance, we're aware that people can buy things online, so we wanted to have interactive items there as well. So we got our own like orange juicer machine, so you can juice your own orange juice, and you can also grind your own coffee, and obviously with all the oat milk dispenser, that's like interactive. So yeah, just having like a few, and a nut butter machine, I can't forget that one, that's like really, really popular. People were like complaining that we didn't have one in Bourneville, and I was like, oh, so, like they really wanted that in. So yeah, so things like that they absolutely cannot get online will draw people in. And then yeah, there were some things that you mentioned in terms of kind of experiences, and from like a hospitality point of view at Kilo Zero, what we try to do to obviously increase that footfall, well, the normal footfall isn't there, so just increase people coming in, is getting them booked onto things like workshops. So like we've been collaborating with a local artist who obviously they do the drawing side of it, and we provide a drink, so that's like an event that people then want to come out and do, because obviously there's no, you can't do that online, and it's interactive, it's a unique experience. And we do afternoon teas, again, a physical thing that you like is a whole experience, wine and cheese, and zero waste cocktail making. And we're going to obviously do I'll be teaching a wreath making course in December. So it's about offering those workshops, which is not just unique to this year. Even as the Clean Kilo, when we were in the Digborough space, we were already starting those workshops, like how to make a DIY beauty bombs, or beeswax wraps and things like that. And yeah, I think that has worked for us a lot, and you know, that's really helped with cash flow and stuff in the past as well. So it's definitely really important to implement that into your plans. And then in terms of like the flip side, from obviously a small business owner perspective, about why maybe like obviously there are a lot of young people that are aware of the Clean Kilo and Kilo Zero that are interested, but I guess there could be many more, and the reason they don't know about it is because we have such small marketing budgets, really. Like you know, when we were setting up the Clean Kilo Moseley, I think there was about a month and a half that I didn't even post on the Clean Kilo. That's because I do all the marketing, because we don't have a big team. And then you got Facebook saying, oh, you haven't posted in X amount of days, and it's like, it tells you off there. But like that's the problem, you know. There was no build up to Kilo Zero opening as well, and the reason for that is because I was physically setting up and painting Kilo Zero, and yeah, so that's a real difficulty, not having the marketing budget as a small business to make people aware. Obviously the big brands, they've got these sponsored posts, they've got Google AdWords, so these young people are being bombarded all the time. So that's unsurprisingly what they're going to think about when they think, oh well, where should we meet for coffee? They go for like maybe an obvious spot, because it's just so subconsciously in their surroundings. So yeah, I think like if you can obviously invest in the marketing, then that would be really key. I know for us now, we've currently got an apprentice. We're interviewing for an apprentice for our marketing. So there's something called Creative Alliance who offer marketing apprentices. So that could be a way for maybe a small business owner to get someone in for that particular role, but not cost them a huge professional fee that they can't afford. So yeah, I think that's really important. And yeah, again, accessibility, and in terms of physically as well, like maybe there's public transport to consider. Maybe if public, people probably children wouldn't want to travel too much like teenagers if it's going to cost them a lot of money, and they find that. So maybe there could be a cheaper public transport for things like that as well, to get people out and about and not at home on the online shopping.
Actually, one thing on that is that we've got just saw a campaign for under 22s to travel for free in Scotland, which I think can have a huge impact on, and just make it, like you say, as easy as possible, taking out that additional barrier to popping into town. I think it's really,
that sounds amazing. I didn't realize. Wow, that's really good.
Yeah, I think again, it's the kind of joined up initiative, isn't it? It's like one thing isn't going to solve everything, but something like that, again, it means that, okay, well, if I haven't got to pay for the cost of transport, actually maybe I can go a bit further, or maybe I can spend a little bit more kind of there. So it is all kind of circular. And I think Alexandra, as you were saying, thinking about our older consumers as well. And I think, as we kind of, new technologies are obviously very welcome. They kind of do great things for us. But sometimes when I observe kind of the increase in kind of self-service checkouts, I think, but for some of our consumers, actually going and order it, and saying, can I have some cheese or whatever it is, the research that strongly shows that is their only point of human contact. And that might be, their only human contact that day. It could even be their only contact that kind of week. So what does kind of retail look like, to kind of balance kind of everyone? As you say, I think sometimes we kind of chase one kind of element, but actually I think we can think kind of, much broader than that as well. How are we doing for questions, Fatosh?
We have 2 more questions, Sarah. I will start with Lorna's question, which is related to community needs, and it is well relevant to accessibility point that Rebecca raised. So the question is, what ideas are there for how we disrupt the ownership of commercial properties? Rents on our local high street are so high that only certain businesses are attracted, meaning we have mostly food and drink venues, but lack of venues that meets the community needs. So this question is asking, what are the ideas for increasing ownership of properties? So what is the role of communities on that?
Thanks very much. Do you want to take that first, Jeanette, from your perspective? Do you think there's a role for kind of community kind of ownership, or do you think that would be challenging for a business?
I love the idea of it, but I don't know how, if people can actually just, these privately owned high street shops and stuff, they've often got landlords that own the whole row of them, and then sometimes they start empty because they're not moving fast enough, of even going back to inquiries, but it doesn't make much difference to them because they're just watching the actual prices go up in what their value is. So that's why there's so many kind of empty retail units, and I don't know how that can be kind of how to take that away from a private landlord and give it to a community. That would be great. And definitely rents are high on local high street. They're even higher in city centre. I'm sure most independent businesses couldn't afford city centre kind of prices. And there will definitely be a lack of diversity in retail, which is basically what's happened in Digbeth as well. We closed as a retail shop because we felt like hospitality would do better in that area, and that's literally so there wasn't, when there's not much retail, then it doesn't attract people to come in for a daytime shop. So then, because the area then became a very much evening venue, we then obviously felt like we had to go with that if we wanted to remain in the area at all. So I in all honesty, I don't know personally how it would be disrupted in terms of the ownership, unless it was, again, government intervention, and that's the only level of kind of accessibility I think would work.
Thanks. Yeah, so go to Alexandra next, and then I'll come to Rebecca.
Yeah, I think so. I mean, there's a really great example of a community ownership taking place in Dumfries. So if people in the call are interested, they're called Mid Steeple Quarter. So it's a community interest company that they formed, and it's about, because they had this real frustration with all these kind of absentee landlords owning of this property. It was sitting empty and it looked terrible. And like we've all been discussing, it just made everyone feel rubbish about the place. And so they formed this community interest company and then have begun, they're amazing, they really are. But also actually had them on as an episode for the podcast, little plug, but second series. And they've basically begun to buy out like some of the property and work with local artists, work with local charity, work with independent makers, like just like you were saying, Rebecca, in terms of plugging into the idea of pop-up shops as well, like giving people a chance, like just to think who might not be able to afford to actually rent it all the way, like for like a year, take a year's lease or longer, longer. Then I wish. So yeah, so it's kind of like working really well. So that was I think that's a really good example, but I think it's becoming, they want to be a blueprint for other towns and cities, but there's not a huge amount of communities doing it. But I would really encourage, like, I think a small group of really like-minded, really dedicated activists, I think is what they are, who really feel passionately about their town, I think can create a lot of change. And I think I was speaking to an academic earlier about them and saying that I think they're flourishing in spite of the planning system and not because of it. So I think there needs to be people who they're not afraid to make change, because I think, like you say, I think it's not, systems aren't built to make this easy, I think, in terms of, and there's a lot of legalese around it and all of that. But yeah, I would definitely encourage, I can put that in the chat just in case people are interested in kind of following their story, and because they've been hugely successful so far.
And there's just a follow-up question to Alexandra. Do you know how they raised the funding for that?
So I think there was an element of a Kickstarter involved, but I think they've also got like funding from like charitable trusts initially, I think. But yeah, I can literally look it up as we're on this call, so I can do that now.
And Rebecca.
Yeah, so I actually found it really interesting when the discussion, the question was around eateries and big name eateries, because small town, as I say, we literally have, one high street and kind of one street off the high street, and they are packed full of shops. But we have a Costa and a Nero, and we've just opened a Starbucks because every other shop is a coffee shop. But as I say, every other shop is a coffee shop, and they are always reasonably full. They're one of the most popular venues in our town, and it's all local coffee shops, and people are upset when their local coffee shop, like people used to have pubs, closes. And so interestingly, in our town, we haven't actually got that challenge. Everyone thought, oh, Starbucks is going to open, we're a bit worried what that's going to do for the 3 coffee shops opposite Starbucks. But actually, I think because we've got that community, people almost go, Starbucks? I'm not going to go to Starbucks. Like, we're going to go to our local coffee shop. And I think that's something that's only developed over time. What I found really interesting when you were talking about pop-ups, Alexandra, is our equivalent. So our theatre, our Corn Exchange, actually has a pop-up in the basement, essentially. It's underneath the theatre, and that's super accessible. Things come and go and they change in there. They're just small units, and you can go around. There's always something quirky, something a bit different. But the other thing that made me think of is we have a weekly market. We have a market on a Friday and a Saturday, and you always often see different stores pop up in the high street, literally in the centre of the town. But it's so much more accessible because you're not paying these excessive rents and rates on a market stall. You can just try it once, or you can try it a few times. Now, I know the challenge that a few people I've spoken to about this, having worked on kind of the Shop Stamford and the Stamford Card scheme, are that actually sometimes getting a marketplace is very challenging, because people have been on there for so many years that even then it's very, very difficult to be able to wedge yourself in there. You've almost got to know how to pitch yourself. And I think that's something that is, again, very useful. I mean, whether there's a role for actually owning the property, again, we're in exactly the same situation as a big city might be. We have a local stately home, and the local stately home owns most of the the real estate in the centre of town, so it's very expensive, the rates are high, etc. They do a lot for the town, there's no doubt about it, but they also come with that higher price tag that does just make things inaccessible. But I think kind of in terms of if there are community spaces available, you know, the unused space under the theatre, things like this that aren't going to be used, the car park that gets turned into a marketplace, you know, on a Friday, they're small disruptions, small changes that you can make, but with local councils allowing things like that to happen, allowing them to go, on a Saturday, you can have a market stall down the high street for a set fee, is the way that we can go about it. And I think local councils have a lot of influence in that. I mean, we've been super fortunate that in the pandemic, obviously everyone, all the eateries had to suddenly only serve outside at one point. And our local council have allowed a lot of places to still have more outdoor seating than they previously had, which there used to be tight restrictions on, you know, you can have 2 tables and chairs outside. And there are more areas of our town that have now just become a little eatery hub. You know, it might be that the shop's actually around the corner, but the benches you can go and sit on are just in the park. But they, you know, and it's creating those spaces and those social spaces. I mean, I think it's really challenging when it comes to starting that. You've got to have, as Alexandra was saying, it's activism. If you've not got the passionate people around you to do it, it's so hard to do it as a small individual or as a small group, because it does take a lot of rallying and it takes a lot of activism and it takes a lot of upkeep, because if you're not then getting new people uptaking that, then it will just drop off. And so I think there's a lot of challenges to kind of whether it's the commercial property ownership or just the role of communities in solving this problem. And it's not going to be solved easily, but I think community is the only way we can go. I think that's what we've all kind of touched on.
Thanks, Rebecca. And I think absolutely. I think it's thinking in a different way, isn't it? Absolutely. Why can't we have a community model? Why does it have to be kind of large landlords that keep their shops empty because they're still going to make money when they sell it eventually? So actually to them it doesn't matter, but actually to the community, actually it does actually kind of matter. So I think absolutely. But I think, as you said, Dumfries are surviving in spite of it. And actually, again, how can that be streamlined? Where's the funding for that? If people have got an idea, you know, making it easy to be able to find the funding, you know, you apply for that. But I think absolutely, you know, thinking about it, that, you know, we're not in this alone. You know, local areas are about community. So actually, if we think about it, why is the default model a landlord that sits somewhere and has never ever been to the high street and actually doesn't have a vested interest? Actually, why isn't the default model kind of communities? But in order to be able to facilitate that, then that has to be made easier. There has to be kind of support. And I can see that Gail had asked a kind of similar kind of question around kind of like co-ops surviving. And I think, yeah, you know, absolutely. But again, it's about bringing like-minded people together, isn't it? It's about facilitating those conversations so that you can find like-minded people as well, and thinking, you know, about some of the initiatives that local councils might want to do about bringing people who've just got, you know, a kind of germ as an idea. As you said, Jeanette, the idea was just sat watching Blue Planet, and there'll be loads more people out there who've got a different idea watching something. Maybe someone's got a great idea for a dementia cafe. Why isn't there a dementia cafe in the center of you know, where we live, and kind of all kind of different things? Because, you know, she said, you know, it's possible, it's just really difficult. So how can we facilitate that? And I think that's kind of like really moving us to the end of our panel. So unless there are there any more questions, Fatos? Have we gone through all of our questions?
One more question just popped up now.
Just sneaked in.
Yeah. This is not a question, more like a comment. Yeah. So there is precedence in community ownership, community assets, and community post offices, but funding is difficult. It needs tons of energy and time and needs to be maintained and sustainable. So maybe finally you could comment on this sustainability element and the feasibility of these community ownership and co-op based models.
Yeah.
Yeah, Alexandra, do you want to go first?
I think you're absolutely right. I think I think you also need, just as Rebecca reflected on, you need a local council that's got your back, and I think that is what Dumfries and Galloway, I think, as in, they really championed the idea, and they've grown like exponentially in terms of the amount of volunteers they have, but now they've got a staff. They've been able to have a staff, which also helps because it's actually a job now that people can. But that, I think you're absolutely right, and I think you need people, elected officials particularly, to come on board early and to champion you, but I completely agree. It's not easy, and yeah, it's not an easy path for sure. And like I say, I think these systems are not built to make it easy for each and every one of us to do it, understandably in some ways, but also, it can be a real barrier. So yeah, it needs, and I think also it's difficult because it's new. And I think actually, if more of us were doing it, or if more of us were really, maybe that could change.
Jeanette?
Yeah, I think, definitely really accurate comments. Tons of energy and time, and needs to be maintained and sustainable. So, like if someone was to set up a community space, like it's quite often they're probably just one individual. Probably they haven't got or they wouldn't have time to maybe commit to a salary job, and this project of setting up this community space. And so it again needs to be like your local councils and stuff to be able to actually make that accessible and happen, because these people can be involved, but it all would really require people giving up their time, probably unpaid, for a very long period of time to actually make it happen. And in this difficult kind of economy at the moment, that's going to be even less feasible than ever. And obviously on the different note, in terms of actually physically having the building, and then obviously being able to run it and sustainably as well, because obviously cost of living and the energy crisis is going to make it difficult and very risky for kind of any kind of like new entrepreneurial businesses wanting to start up at the moment because of the current situation. So again, like kind of my kind of point takeaway is going to be very much, if we want our local high street to survive, whether it be in the sole trader ownership or community ownership, it then needs to be help from council or government to really support this. Otherwise, a lot of them will close down in these next 6 months, and if not the next 6 months, probably after the business energy price cap is over, because I'm scared for them, because I'm thinking, gosh, my energy prices are going to be like quadruple by then. So that's just the current reality.
Yeah, thanks, Jeanette. And I think absolutely, I think that is one of the biggest concerns, that what we do, it has to be sustainable and the support has to be right. It's got to be supporting the right elements. I'll take a quick reflection from Rebecca on that before we move to our final reflections.
Very quick. So I think it just parallels what Jeanette and Alexandra have been saying. I mean, people are risk averse, and often you might have the idea, someone in your town might have the idea, you don't know each other. And it's a very scary thing to start building a community of people who aren't potentially already in a community. It can be all sorts of different people who want this to happen for different reasons. And it is a scary thing. And I think that's what's not always acknowledged. I mean, what's worked well in our town is that the biggest employer in the town, which is the local independent school, have taken on some of the work. So they've said, okay, we're going to be the distributors of the local magazine that you can give out that promotes the businesses, and we're going to be one of the main sponsors of some of the events for the businesses. And I think that's where big companies can come in. As Sarah said earlier, they say that they're all really local minded, that they want to support their local area, that they're going to have a store, and that's where they can do this, is in starting to support these communities with the financial backing, as we've said, even if it's just in terms of manpower. A couple of hours a week to a big corporation, they can probably spare someone, but it makes a much bigger impact than a couple of hours a week to those local communities.
Thanks ever so much. So I'm going to go to my panel for their very final reflections. So I'll say 1 minute each on your very final reflection. So I'll go to Jeanette first.
So I think I want to say to any kind of like, you know, small business owners out there, like obviously it's a difficult time, so really do think about your product and your service and what you're offering, and kind of what we talked about before, like making sure you're offering the really unique experiences or really unique products that people can't buy online, and obviously providing that real good level of service that gives that whole community feel when people come in. And then and in terms of kind of trying to get through this difficult period, really, you know, you be vocal about it, talk to your local MPs and councillors, and hopefully the more people that are having those conversations, the bigger change that we can create together.
Thanks very much, Jeanette. I'll go to Rebecca.
So I think my kind of final thoughts on this are that if this is something that communities want to do, something that an individual wants to do, don't be overwhelmed by the fact that it feels like it's a huge mammoth task. The support is out there. It might not be really obvious. It might not actually exist yet, but communities are the way that you're going to be able to create it and find it. You know, there's no funding in your town, but you have some really, really big corporations on the high street. Why don't you contact them? As soon as you get one on board, you say, oh, well, actually, Tesco and Marks and Spencer's, they've said they're going to support us on this. And suddenly it's a little bit of a competition between them. They all want to show their corporate responsibility. And so you might as well make the benefit of that, you know, even if it's that they're going to have posters in the window for your local business, they're not going to be able to support you financially. There are so many things and opportunities, you know, look for those grants, look for the charities that are willing to support these things, because we've seen that it can be done. We've seen from Alexandra's examples from my hometown, there are places that can do this. There are countless that we haven't touched upon. And so you've just got to keep persevering. And that's the challenge. The challenge is that you've got to come together and support each other, because we're all living our lives. We have busy lives, we have jobs. But if we really want to make it happen, we know that it can happen because there are good examples out there that have done it.
Thanks very much. And Alexandra.
Yeah, absolutely. Keep the faith, I think is I think it's going to be difficult. I think we're about to embark on we're already within a really difficult period for retailers, for consumers. It's a really testing time. And I think really leaning into what helped us do, like we're saying, in this first kind of crucial 6 months of the pandemic, really leaning into the idea of collaboration, talk to other business owners, share ideas about how to bring people into your kind of local area, into your store, into your shop. Or I think it's just important that we share the bit of the burden and just hold our elected officials to account, and hold those kind of, like you're saying, those larger corporations who sit on the high street, get in touch. I love that. Like, hold them, they have a stake in your community, and remind them of that. And I think we just need to just kick up a bit of a fuss and be unpopular, be prepared to say things that are unpopular, because we need change. We can't, otherwise we're gonna lose something that really means it has a crucial part in all our lives.
Yeah, I think that absolutely. I think that's a great note for us to end on. And, you know, I think it is really positive. You know, we have seen great examples of, you know, what can be done. We've heard about Stanford and Free say there's some great work going on at Newport. So I like that. Let's be unpopular. I'm really up for a bit of kind of rebellion and to be unpopular. And I think, you know, we owe it to ourselves actually to kind of, you know, make kind of demand change, whether we're a consumer, we're part of communities, you know, we're part of our society, and we owe it to our future to fall in love and to stay in love with our high streets. Once again, I'd like to thank our panelists for giving up their time today. Fatos, thank you for steering us admirably through all the questions, and the ESRC for allowing us to host our event. And I'd also like to say thank you to our audience for listening to us, providing some great questions, but also from the three of us for the opportunity to actually be able to talk retail, which we love doing and talking retail. So we're grateful for the opportunity, and we do regular events, so please look out for our regular events. So thank you, audience, for joining us this evening. Have a great rest of your evening.
Thank you so much, Sarah, for hosting us so brilliantly.
Yeah,
thank you
so much. Pleasure.
Thank you, everyone.
Bye.
Bye.